go ahead and begin in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful, and kindle in them the fire of your love. Pour forth your Spirit, O Lord, and they shall be created, and you shall renew the face of the earth. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay. So tonight, I'm learning to not do an introduction, to jump right into things. We're going to look at advancing in discernment, as in how do we improve our ability to discern. So it's not, as we'll find out, simply a matter of having the recipe, the rules, and following the rules. And the more we follow the rules, the better we do. There's a relationship there. But if we're thinking about discerning as hearing, you can listen and have all the skills to listen. And I think they give us, in school nowadays, they will give listening skills and note-taking skills. So you can have all those rules in 5th grade, but then by the time you're in 12th grade and in college, you're playing by the same rules, but you're able to listen a little bit more deeply and a little bit better. And that's what we'd be looking at. So is how does one strengthen and grow in our ability to discern in that. Okay. And one of the things I think is helpful, because we will see how this comes up also through Diadochus. I don't think that we did the first week talked about this kind of 4 quadrants of discernment. I'm seeing blank faces, so likely not. And this is something I would say that I pulled together and developed as another way of describing, of illustrating, and comes from, of course, the saints and others who have written about discernment. That when it comes to that, there are really, everything can go fit into one of 4 areas. And this applies to the rules from Diadochus as well. And we need to use each of these 4 to discern. One of the pitfalls and dangers is that we tend to take one area and define discernment by that one area. Okay. For example, prayer. Okay, to pray is important for discernment. Not only to know the one who we love, to know the taste of God, but to take to prayer. Lord, what are you asking me of me now? Where are you present now? Okay. And I think we've known people who, whenever you ask them about what to do, or whenever they talk about what they need to do, talk about only prayer. Well, it came to me in prayer. So therefore it's God, and therefore it's good. Okay. I know one lady who, and this is going back many years ago when I was working at the coffee shop in Columbia. And I loved the lady. She had a great heart, great faith. And she said, yeah, one day she was in prayer and God told her to give up everything. So she left her job, left her house, everything, and was just living on the street. And I saw the pain that was causing her. And looking at her life, could tell, you could just see the fruit of it and say, God wasn't asking you to live on the street. But it came to her in prayer, so therefore it was God. Okay? So we have that tendency. Prayer is necessary, or the knowledge of God. The knowledge of God being things like reading Scripture, knowing God's law, knowing His commandments, okay? Knowing what He asks of us. Okay? Having those. Hitler claimed that he was creating a holy nation, holy people. Reportedly that he was doing God's work. Thou shalt not kill. Okay, not using the knowledge of God. Okay, self-knowledge. Okay, this comes a lot of in the guise of, too, being aware of your interior movements is one aspect of it. That sense that we've had at times where just that divine peace has come over us when we've had a thought. Or we've had that confidence. When one of our friends has been looking for a job and they tell us about this one and it looks good, and then we just have this interior sense of, I don't understand why, but I know you're going to get the job. Or it can also work being aware of, am I doing this out of nervousness and out of fear? Am I afraid to tell someone, no, I can't cover that mass because out of obligation? Or because really it's out of pride because I want to be the priest known as the one who can be counted on? And when we sense and are aware of those interior movements, it's easier for me to recognize, oh, I'm doing this not out of generosity, but out of pride. Recognizing God's voice. The other thing of self-knowledge is I can be in high school and think that God is calling me and telling me to be a professional football player. But I'm not an athlete. I suck at football. Or wanting to be a doctor, and I think God is calling me to become a doctor, a healer, because that's good. And every time at the sight of blood, I have to fight from passing out. Okay. That's part of the self-knowledge too. Okay, that helps us discern what is God calling me. Okay, and virtue. Virtues are the way that God teaches us how to walk and act in faith. To act with justice, with kindness, with generosity, with prudence. That's a big one that gets left out a lot of times when it comes to discernment, is we actually don't make prudential choices. So things like income, having a roof over our head, providing for the kids, are prudential judgments, and that is a virtue. Okay. The converse of that, the desolating aspect of that, would be vices. So not to act. So God always calls us to act in virtue, and if we act in virtue, it will be an act of love. But if we act in a vice, it will never be an act of love. Maybe something good will come out of it. Okay. But if I'm acting out of greed, or maybe if I'm acting out of pride, and that is why I want my name on the building and want to give $2 million to our new church offices, okay, there's a benefit coming out of that. But because I'm acting out of pride and I want my name on it, it's not really a virtuous act. It's acting out of a vice in that. And some will look at it and say, well, it's a good result. The ends justify the means. But as St. Pope John Paul II said, the ends, something that is intrinsically evil can never become intrinsically good. The circumstances, the ends might only mitigate the sin, but do not remove the sin itself. So what we need in discernment is, in a sense, the center. Okay, so that knowledge of God, prayer, self-knowledge, and virtue, all of them help keep us in line and know what God desires of us and what His voice is saying. Because He's always speaking in all of these, but sometimes some ways are more clear than other times and other ways. And it's easier if you're only looking to one thing. Say virtue, it's generosity is a virtue. So I give so much of my money that I can't pay the electric bill in my own house. And then the pipes freeze. Okay. And the house gets destroyed. I didn't use prudence. I acted out of virtue, generosity, so isn't that what God wants? Well, did I take it to prayer? Do I have self-knowledge in that? Walking down the alley in New York City at 2 o'clock in the morning by myself. Okay. We can say, well, but fear is good, right? And that fear keeps me from walking down that alley at 2 o'clock in the morning. Okay. So I may feel that and say, well, that's self-knowledge. Okay, that's a good thing. Again, prudence. Okay, it's not the fear that's driving. Sometimes God will let us feel that fear because he knows if you're not afraid, you're going to go down and get yourself killed. And I don't want you to get killed. So I'm going to let you feel that natural fear that's there. But if we use prudence, or maybe I'm going down that alley because of sloth, because of laziness. I don't want to walk around the block. Okay. So I wanted to give you this just to kind of have a concept in mind. And see also, because what I'm going to do tonight, and I think this will work out when we go through the rules for advancing, they will address these areas. And I'm just going to kind of do a little check mark in there to see, because he does talk about them. Okay. So by way of no introduction, that's the introduction for tonight, but give that foundation. Okay. In there. So if we're looking at advancing in discernment, we can also just ask the basic question of how does one advance in something? How does one grow intellectually? And I think learning a language, a second or third or foreign language, gives us a good example. Okay, what's the first step if you want to learn? So if you speak English only and want to learn French, use prudence. Don't learn French. No, I can say that because I learned it, so I can make fun of myself on that. So any language, the first step is to study it. Okay. This is where we build our verb charts and our conjugational charts, and what are the forms of grammar, the translations. How do you say where is the airport, or I have a small black cat in Spanish? Okay, that's the first. And you can learn all of that, and you can be very good at that and translate back and forth very well. But if any one of you have studied a language, that only gets you so far. Okay. In Spanish, there is the phrase dar la luz. When Mary gave birth to Christ, it says Maria dar la luz. And that puzzled me, and when I first read that in the scriptures, I'm thinking, what kind of translation of scripture is this? There's nowhere in the Latin or anything that talks about giving the light. Okay. But even though nacio is I give birth, they use dar la luz, means to give birth in Spanish. So learning in their cultural things. This is why a Chilean and a Peruvian and a Mexican can have a hard time having a conversation at times, because language interacts with the culture in there. And you have to know, there's one word when I was in Guadalajara, they kept saying ya. And I had a hard time. It's like, I don't remember that in class. What does ya mean? Could mean I already did that. Could mean, do you want to go there? Do you want to do that? Could mean yes. There were about a half dozen different meanings, and that's why I was having a hard time figuring out what it meant. It was all about the context and seeing. Okay? So you've got to then know the culture. And know not simply in the way, and Deacon John brought this up this weekend, it's not just about knowing, again, this kind of studying and learning. It's about that being, that knowing, that it becoming a part of you, in a sense permeating you in the culture. And there's a way of, for language, we wouldn't say that I became a Mexican, but there's kind of a becoming of that. A change that actually has to take place in me, in my way of thinking, because when I when I first was giving homilies in Spanish, I had to have it written out word for word verbatim. And I could not deviate from the script. And Google was very helpful. Google Translate, it works well English to Spanish, not Spanish to English. Horrible Spanish to English. But one of the things that I realized was that there are certain ways that we speak in English, the grammatical forms, that if you write that, it doesn't translate very well into Spanish. But to reword it, to rethink about the order of things, or to say I like it a lot of times and saying I really like it, that is great. My thesaurus, internal thesaurus is failing me right now. But there actually became a way of, when I would go to write it, the homily for Google Translate, I would write it differently than I would if I were speaking it in English. Okay. Coming to know the culture, there's a becoming. Okay. Same thing with acting. To be a good actor, we can say, well, learn the lines, study the lines, memorize the lines, and the emotions that you're supposed to give with it. Okay. And then we talk about, but the superstar actors, the best actors, engross themselves, and they'll go study and they'll live the life of the character that they're wanting to become in a ways. This is how Shia LaBeouf, about his conversion through the movie with Padre Pio. Okay, in a sense, immersing and becoming. And then once, in a way, not again becoming, but being able to imagine when they go into that acting mode, they become that character. And we've seen movies and we've seen productions where, on one hand, it seems very structured and rigid, memorized lines, versus others where they just seem to flow and it actually draws us into the character in there. There is that becoming aspect of it. Okay. Okay. Discernment works the same way, but there's a very interesting thing here too that takes place. And this is an introduction to probably one of next year's series, that the early church, the fathers talked about the spiritual life as the two ways. Okay. This is righteousness and perfection. Okay. And really could give probably a 20-session series on righteousness and perfection and the relationship there. But the idea, the principle is, and I think the one example I'll try to use or correlation is Old Testament, New Testament. The Old Testament and the lower way, the easier way is righteousness, is tell me what to do. What are your commands, Lord? This is what Moses and all the prophets lived under. If I do right, then I have a shot at salvation. The focus of righteousness is on me being good. Okay. And from me being good, then maybe good things will happen. Okay. But Jesus said, you have heard it said, but I tell you. Okay. Christ opened the way to perfection. Okay. That all of a sudden now, loving one another as you would have them love you is not enough. Okay. This is also a way that the early scripture scholars dealt with some of the seeming contradictions in the New Testament and Christ's commandments. Okay. So we actually do have two second and greatest commandments. Love one another as you would have them love you. But I tell you, love one another as I have loved you. Okay. The first step is righteousness. Let me love as the so-called golden rule, treat others as you'd have them treat themselves, but Christ called us to something higher. Not a human love, but love as I have loved you, even to the giving of your own life, because there is no greater love than to give one's life for a friend. Okay. Do right, sacrifice. My salvation, the salvation of others, becomes central. And that is the gateway to perfection. That is the love that Teresa talked about. And as much as I love Teresa of Jesus, again, we can say she did not create this idea of perfection in the way of perfection. She was drawing from the early church fathers and the early life of the church. Talked about now Christ has opened the way of perfection. This is not doing but being good. Okay. And this is part of how we advance in discernment. In the beginning, we learn, we know the rules and what I should do. When I'm in desolation, I shouldn't act. When I am angry or riled by the passions, call on the name of Jesus. Have the formulas, then it becomes a matter of being. Being like the one to whom we want to follow. Again, can go back to the language. Who understands a language better? Someone who has not even studied it. Someone who has done 6 semesters at university and learned all of the conjugations and all the vocabulary rules. Or someone who has lived for 6 years and become like the people culturally. Okay. Discernment, we're talking about learning the language of God. Learning the language of the spiritual life. Are we better to discern not knowing the spiritual life? Or learning the rules? Or engaging in and being transformed? Okay. So before we get into the particular rules, because we're going to look at the first steps towards growing and advancing, then we'll look at general rules for growth in discernment, and then particularly meaningful ways of advancing and taking great strides. Before we start on those, any questions? Because I probably have given you about 12 hours of material condensed. Okay. You're supposed to ask so I can take a drink. Okay. I'm guessing it makes sense, or still some cloudiness? Yeah.
The thing that you said, if you act in virtue, it will be an act of love.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote that. So if you succumb to vice, that's the actual opposite.
That is not an act of love. Yeah. And that goes to the very nature. Okay. Virtues are those things which lead to life. The opposite we call vices lead to death. Towards life is an act. Love is always towards life. Something not in love is always towards death. Because if it was towards life, it would be love.
And that would apply to things like eating that extra piece of cake. Those
Yes. So everyone can hear at home too. That also applies to things like eating that extra piece of cake and those vices. Because if we can think about even the small vices does, in your experience, has actual good, true good come from it? And this is part of discernment too. We remember the effects of things, so we learn from that.
So it would be similar to T.S. Eliot's The Last Temptations, the greatest treason to do the right deed, or not the right deed for the wrong reason.
It's like T.S. Eliot's last temptation of doing the right thing for the wrong reasons. That, yes, yeah. Because again, sometimes a good can come from a bad action. That God is very good at making good things coming from bad actions. That doesn't make it bad. It's kind of like you lucked out on it. Yeah. Okay, so looking at the first step, 74. And here we go, right off the bat. Self-knowledge is the necessary first step toward mastery of discernment. Okay. But unless it is transcended into knowledge of God, okay, one's attempts at discernment fall miserably short. How many times have we heard someone discerning by saying, go with your passions. I know I'm right. I have absolute certitude that I'm right. So how could I be wrong if I'm so certain I'm right? That's all focused in on self-knowledge. And how you can be wrong is sometimes we're wrong. Okay? We're not, omnipotent, omnipresent, all knowledge. We don't know everything. And that's getting driven by the passions. But it's important to note that's a first step. Okay. Because if we go back to the language, if I'm trying to learn Spanish as an adult, we're not talking children because children have this almost mystical ability, the supernatural ability of sponges. Okay. And we need it during that phase in life. If I don't really know English grammar, when they start talking about conjugating verbs, and I have trouble with English grammar, so let me see if I can come up with the right words. The past participle, the present tense, the subjunctive form, these things. How can I learn Spanish? Becomes much, much more difficult. And we could say, or even knowing the words. If I don't have a very big English vocabulary, how can I start learning Spanish when I don't even know the English word it translates to? There are times I will be giving a homily or speaking in Spanish, and I can't think of the word, and my mind, because it's been thinking of Spanish, can't even think of the English word. And what do you do? I can't think of any words. Okay, so I think that's clear. And to know our relationship to God and what that is. Okay. This is what it helps us do, is how we relate. If you are unaware of your spiritual reality and identity, that there is a truth to feelings and movements at times, of that, the difference between that divine just peace that washes over us and tiredness and sleepiness that masquerades as peace sometimes. Or could be apathy. The difference between being truly apathetic and being divinely confident in something. Okay, knowing that self-knowledge and awareness is that first step. So then we can look, and this is why the book of Genesis The book of Genesis begins with man and God in relationship to him, and knowing who we are allows us to know who God is, which is ultimately what we want. So if we stay here and don't go up here, then we can see how it gets stuck. And it transcends into knowledge of God. So now I can know who I am and where I am. And it's not perfect, it's not in its fullness. Then I can encounter God and also start seeing what part of Him I reflect. If I am made in the image of God, then by looking up at Him, I grow in self-knowledge. Oh, and that's the image of the Creator, and I get drawn closer to God. Okay, so these also can amplify each other and help grow. And we have to continue doing that. But unless our self-knowledge transcends into knowledge of God, our attempts will fall miserably short. The Myers-Briggs, the What Color is Your Parachute book. That was one everyone told me when I was in D.C. If you're trying to figure out what you want to do, read What Color is Your Parachute. I read that, I thought, why is everybody so fascinated by this book? Awaken the Giant Within. Okay. So much of our popular discernment ends here and doesn't go anywhere. Okay. So that's the first step. Begins with self-knowledge. So looking at some general rules for growth. We can think of these in terms too like virtues. So it's not going to be a specific, when this happens, do this, but have this general disposition, this general attitude. And by practicing that, you will grow in discernment. Okay. Because one of the hardest things for us to realize, and I think it's even harder over the way our teaching pedagogy and psychological pedagogy has become over the last couple of decades, is that you don't advance directly in something by targeting it. You have to learn the attributes that support and give you the capacity and ability, and then apply. People say, well, they need to teach priest homiletics because so many priests don't know how to give a homily. And then you get into homiletics, and every homiletics instructor is like, I don't know how to teach this. What do you do? And you can have students who go through with flying colors, and seminarians do great in homiletics, but do horrible giving a homily. Because you can't, by studying homiletics, you can't actually give a good homily. Without saying anything about my own, I feel, so I have 194, 195 hours of graduate theology. Most men, when they're ordained as a priest, have 100 to 120 hours. I say God knew that I needed a lot more than everybody else. But when it comes to praying and developing a homily and preparing one, I feel like I barely have enough in order to. Because it doesn't come from homiletics class. It comes from the knowledge of the spiritual life, the knowledge of scriptures, the knowledge of God, and all of these things give rise. Okay. So these are the general dispositions. Okay. Rule number 7. And I notice tonight we'll go from 7 to 11. I did not plan that. Okay. Rule number 7, in order to discern, one needs to spend time in spiritual discourse and the prayer of quiet. I think we've talked about this before, mention in my commentary, St. Teresa of Jesus describes this according to one's ability to recognize the taste of God. Okay. So you actually have to be spending time. If you want to know what a friend thinks you should do, or be able to recognize where they are present, spend time listening and talking with them and getting to know them. Because even in the beginning, of any relationship, you have to ask, what do you want me to do? And they have to be very explicit. I want you to do this. I want you to put the tables 5 along this wall, space them 2 feet apart, and then add a 6th table and turn it at a 90-degree angle. You have to give explicit instructions in the beginning of the relationship in order for someone to follow. But after time and after years, and we've had friends that we've experienced this with, I think most of us, is you don't need much instruction. Set up the tables like you did last time. Okay. And maybe in the strongest relationships, you would just say, could you go ahead and set up the tables? And with that alone, they'll set them up the right way. But if you get an even stronger relationship, you know what they're going to ask, so they don't even have to say anything. Okay. It's the same with our relationship with God and discernment. Spend time in spiritual discourse with Him. In the beginning, we need louder, clearer instructions. In the beginning, there are things like, Lord, if I make this basket, you are calling me to the priesthood. Yes, many times. And you miss, and you go, okay, now, And the next week, the same thing. We've all done things like that. Or, Lord, if you're calling me and want me to become a priest, then have someone ask me about it. Okay. It's okay to need specific instructions. That's in the beginning. Gideon with the fleece. And pardon me if I mix up the order of this. But when God commands him to lead a small group of soldiers, Gideon doesn't say right away, okay, Lord, and go. And he is praised for his faith. God praises him for his faith. He says, Lord, if this is you, then when I put the fleece down, the grass around it is wet and the fleece is dry. And I think I reversed the order of that. But, okay. And the next day he got up, and the grass was wet and the fleece was dry. And he says, pardon me, God. Pardon me, Lord, but just so I am certain it is you, now let the fleece be wet and all the ground around it dry. And the next day the fleece was wet and all the ground around it was dry. He was saying, I need specific. I should know. And I've prayed this prayer, and it's a good prayer to say, Lord, maybe I should know what you want me to do, but I'm not quite certain. So please give me another sign. Okay, that's in the beginning. We need it. We're growing. Until we can be at one day like Claire, because it was Claire and Francis. For some reason, I get them and Scholastic and Benedict mixed up. There's no logical reason why. Okay. But before she was going to die, Claire and Francis were having the conversation. And Francis said, it's time, I need to leave. And Claire said a prayer. It's Benedictine. See, I told you. I got to figure out a way to get myself unconfused. They're twins. Okay, so they were twins. That might be helpful. Okay, thank you. And thank you for your mercy. Correction is good. So you know the story. And part of that too is, first time I heard that, I was like, well, that was kind of arrogant of Scholastica to know that, to decide God's will, that it was his will that Benedict stay so it would rain. And then when you converse with God more, you begin to understand. Because you've had times like that she knew. She had discerned. She knew that she was going to die. She knew that it was God's will for Benedict to stay. So what she was asking was his will to be fulfilled, without having to go and take a 7-day retreat. Okay. So spend time in spiritual discourse. Here, it's an indirect way. You actually grow in discernment by just prayer, by reading scriptures, by spending time with God, not by asking the question, Lord, what are you saying to me? But just having a conversation. 11. To learn the ways of discernment, one must seek spiritual knowledge. And while it seems to be very obvious, it is often what is overlooked and not even considered in our modern age. But if we think about it, what we're trying to do is discern between spirits of good and evil. Therefore, one must seek out spiritual knowledge, not worldly knowledge. And of course, coming off of 7, this is the reason and the need for spiritual discourse, to guide our intellect towards learning of the spiritual things and recognizing if this is a desolating spirit or if this is a consolating spirit. Is this something of God or is this something of the evil one? To recognize those we need to learn about that world. Spiritual knowledge and the spiritual life. Okay. Awaken the giant within. What color is my parachute? All these things may touch through the psychology, the spiritual, but it won't actually help you discern. 14, which is at the bottom of the same page. Receive the love of God, and one will be transformed into his love. Okay. And I forgot to mark on my... So, going back to the last two, spiritual discourse, prayer and knowledge of God. Okay. Seeking spiritual knowledge. I'm also going to say virtue, because virtues is the way we act like God. So learning justice, fortitude, prudence. 14, receive the love of God, and one will be transformed into his love. Primarily receiving the love of God through prayer. And it may not seem immediately on the surface that this is a rule to guide for the discernment of spirits, but unless we call the other guide, which is to recognize the sounds and movements of the Spirit, one must live in the Spirit so that one becomes like the one whom one wants to recognize, in order to recognize where he is present. If God remains foreign to us and unknown to us, how can we recognize him? Okay. But if we become like, this is the moving down, this is the movement into perfection. If I become like him, I'm naturally going to pick up and receive the signals that he's sending out. We could think about it, in the terms of, I'm imagining here, and this isn't a real clear image, and so it may not work, but John of the Cross describes, the beginning of the spiritual life. We're a dead log with a little bit of life in it, not completely dead. Okay, because if we're completely dead, there'd be no life to grow, to regenerate. Okay, and if at that time God were to purge us of all that is sinful and wrong, the whole log would burn, even the living parts in that. This is why it's step by step. Okay, that he has to breathe life into the living and then take pieces of the dead out. And that eventually, at some point, there's going to be more life than dead. And that's when the flames intensify, because now what's living can sustain and survive it. That's why when one gains in the spiritual life, suffering increases, because you can handle it more. Because if we didn't, if we had that suffering in the very beginning, we'd be like, I'm done with this. Okay. If this is what it means to follow Christ, no, forget it. That's the reality how it would be. So at that time, though, if you're thinking about what can resonate, does the living or the dead parts resonate with God? Evil cannot stand the presence of the good. So therefore, if God becomes present and we are not yet transformed into love, we get blown away. But the parts that are living and life-giving in the presence of that same flame grow and strengthen. So we're able to receive. It's like a radio tower. The taller we build it, the taller God builds us, the better we are at receiving the signals. And we're reminded that the ultimate end of discernment is that we become restored in the likeness of God. Okay. Created in the image, lost the likeness, restored to the likeness. Looking ahead to number 31. One increases in discernment by recognizing the wiles or tactics of the evil one, who is always trying to lull the mind away from the Holy Spirit. Okay. Recognize the wiles or tactics of the evil one. Vices. Recognize, identify the difference between what is virtuous, what is vicious, what leads to life, what leads to death. Okay. So many of the modern virtues of the United States, such as pride, self-determinism, independence. Not talking about the independence of the nation from a monarch. I'm talking about self-independence. Is not a virtue. Because the reality is we are dependent on one another. This is why we think of humility as recognizing the reality and the truth. Because the truth is we are in need of others. No one is self-sufficient. And if someone were self-sufficient, and we know people who are more self-sufficient than others, what's the tendency that happens? Is we don't actually have as many relationships. We rely on ourselves. We don't reach out to others. Okay, I can do it. I don't need you. Okay. People wonder why the most intelligent people nowadays are more likely to be atheists than faith-filled. And how many have lost the church and say, but he's so smart. Why? Because self-dependent on his own knowledge or her own knowledge of things. Okay. We isolate because whether we like it or not, our need drives us out to connect with others. And whether I am reaching out to someone out of generosity or out of need for survival, a bond's made. And that bond is love, whether it originates from me reaching out or the other reaching out to me. A bond of love is made. And that's what breathes God in more. Recognizing the tools and the tactics. Okay. Other things that we know he likes to just twist the truth a little bit. That saying things sound good. I won't go into a long discourse here because I'm also aware of the time. Love is love. Who can argue with that? Okay. But where does that take us? Okay. There are some others this past week that I thought of, but very frequently, very commonly, there's just a little, like it's almost, I can't really disagree with it, but it's also missing a big part of the truth in there. It's happened with a lot of our language and our words nowadays. Okay. Number 57. By walking in virtue, the evil one's schemes become ineffective. He is always trying to break relationships. His work is the work of vice by its very nature, because he is trying to lead us in opposition and away from God. So if he's trying to lead us away from God, then anything that we do that follows him leads us away from God. It is a vice. Conversely, if we walk in virtue, we're walking away from the things that lead us away from God. This is where I get excited because it's it's scientific. It's cause and effect. It's observations. It's coming to know the truth. And by walking in virtue, so those things that are recognized, so by acting more just. Okay. If we have someone who, has never said a harsh word about another person, we say walking in that virtue of kindness, then is someone going to be very successful at tempting them to say something, to gossip and say something bad about their brother or a stranger or somebody? Not really, because what this means is, other way of looking at it is by walking in virtue, we strengthen in our ability to love. So by that nature, we would be less likely to act against love, to fall in weakness. So actually, by walking and being virtuous, those temptations to stray from the presence of God become ineffective. And we grow in our ability to discern. It's harder to be fooled and to be tricked when we know what the tricks are. That is Friday. They're practicing for Friday, so this is my spiel to come. Yeah. You get a preview and invite others. For the people at home, invite others. 6 o'clock lessons and carols on Friday. And now I can't use this video for next year. This is for 2023. 85. As one advances in following the commandments, the various attempts So, knowledge of God advances in following the commandments. The various attempts and attacks of the evil one have less of an effect. If you know what God asks of you and desires of you, it's going to be harder for you to get fooled into doing something that is against Him. Because most of those who have been baptized, received the gifts of the Holy Spirit in confirmation, the majority of our sin can be traced and connected to a lack of knowledge of God and understanding. Okay. Because we've made that choice and that mark for the most part. This is not a blanket. This is not saying everyone who has been baptized and confirmed can't sin. We know that's not true. But it also makes sense that at that point, someone is not willfully, as likely to willfully, knowingly betray God and choose to go against God. But the most of the sins, most of the faults would come from some form of knowledge, failure of knowledge of God. And how many people have made great pitfalls and mistakes because, Father, I didn't know that that was a sin. I didn't know that the church still said I have to go to Mass every Sunday. I didn't know it was a holy day of obligation. Okay. Or even among those who, I would say the majority of Catholics who are against the church's teachings on same-sex attraction, on abortion, don't actually know what the church's teachings are. And what they're against is a misunderstanding or thinking of or a wrong or a false understanding of what the church actually says and teaches. It's a failure of knowledge. And we can be culpable of that. We can be persistent in that and not wanting to know. But that doesn't undermine the reality of, that knowledge of the commandments and knowledge of God. By those, the various attempts and attacks of the evil one have less of an effect. And when one continues on to the perfection of virtues, these attempts no longer have any effect. Taking the higher road to perfection. Real quickly, I want to look at the ways of advancing, and there are just 3 rules here. So I think, even though self-knowledge was the first step, and there may be only one, getting to see how all of the rules really address one of these areas. Okay, and if we strengthen them, if we ignore one, we're missing a key part of discernment and being able to grow in discernment, any one of them. Going back to number 25. Through detachment, the mind can perceive God's ineffable blessings. And these are pivotal ways of advancing, of taking great leaps. Okay, so in detachment, we can then become greater aware of God's presence and His blessings. And we can see that if we understand what is meant by detachment. Okay, we are rooted in the earth. This is where we begin. And God is always trying to connect us and draw our attention up to heavenly, to divine things. Okay, that's where we're going. But we're rooted here. And the attachment of things draw our vision back to them rather than the one who created. Okay. And even good things. When I first really strengthened and came to awareness of my faith. Scripture, Jesus said, when you pray, pray, Our Father who art in heaven. And that's the only prayer. So that was the prayer that I prayed. And pretty much that was it. And there are times when I could spend 45 minutes praying at one time. Very deliberately, very meditatively, very intentionally. Okay. And then it started bearing less fruit. And I started learning other prayers. And we can become so attached, and this happens in the spiritual life, that the things that helped us in the beginning, they start to lose their consoling flavor. And we think, well, what did I do wrong? And we want to latch onto them. When what it is these things are not, praying the Our Father is not the end goal in itself. That does not equal salvation. But it is very fruitful and beneficial in bringing us and raising us in the way of salvation. That then there becomes a time when there are more aspects. What about praying the rosary? What about developing a relationship with Mary? What about praying to the saints and asking for their intercession? And how by growing in those ways of prayer, then I start developing those relationships with the church. And what about start even praying my own, more improv, prayers, and being able to express my own desires and love, not through the words of the church and the tradition, but now to be able to express those feelings of the heart on my own. And it's the whole picture. So these things help lift us up, and God says, I want to lift you higher. I want to lift you higher. I want to lift you higher. And we have to allow ourselves to let go of those things that could weigh us down and prevent us. It's in terms of discernment. This is where in the beginning talking about people, some latch onto one and only use one. To say, well, I've done great discernment through prayer, and that's where I've found God, and He's led me, and I've seen His presence. Okay, then God would actually shut it off, and He'll stop talking to me in prayer. And He'll deliberately stop talking to me in prayer. Why? He wants me to get over here also. So maybe for a time He wants me to focus on knowledge of God, and I can find great by opening the Scriptures. Every time I open it, I find guidance. And even answers to questions I didn't know I wasn't even asking yet. And then that may dry up. Okay. But if I'm latched on to these things, okay, then I'm stuck. Okay. So it's through detachment. And detachment is not that I stop drinking coffee altogether. But if I didn't have time tonight to make a cup of coffee, I'm okay. I can enjoy it greatly, but I'm not dependent on it. Okay. Sundays, my first cup of coffee, if I have one, does not come until after my last Mass. We know people who can't function, and maybe some of us here can't hardly function without it. Okay. Through detachment, now we can perceive God's ineffable blessings. So that gives us knowledge of God. Okay. And I would say self-knowledge, because you have to know what is holding you back, what you are attached to. What does your heart draw to that is not God? Okay. 44. Voluntarily abstaining from what is abundant and enjoyable is constitutive of knowledge and discernment. So that doesn't make much sense unless we actually had the one we just had about detachment. Voluntarily abstaining from what is abundant is constitutive of knowledge and discernment. When we are in abundance, we want to live in that abundance. And we also become less attentive. We can become lackadaisical. That actually being in abundance hurts our ability to discern. Why? Because now we're surrounded by other things than what is God and what is holy. Because again, here, abundance, we're not talking about abundance of God's blessings, abundance of spiritual things. It's talking about abundance of material things. How much harder is it to see God in watching an episode of The Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous versus seeing God on a special of the poverty of Ethiopia? We hear about the happiness, the joy that is in poverty, that in a place of wealth is harder to find. One of the things that I've noticed and learned probably been about 10 or 15 years ago is the difference in people's personalities and attitude and culture and relationship with God from those in the cities versus those in the country. Okay. One of the reasons for that, and you can see in the hardship that people who grew up in the concrete jungle have emotionally and relationships, everything they've encountered, unless you might have a tree planted here or there, is concrete. It's like it's isolating us, insulating, and each layer insulates us from creation. How much harder is it to come to know the Creator when everything you're surrounded is created by human hands? All of a sudden now, the Creator becomes humanity. And when we think about the history of cities and the struggles and the challenges and the struggles in the life of our biggest cities now, one of the greatest temptations is to see men as God, as the Creator, the ultimate Creator. Okay. Why cause and effect? Because just walking outside and being in nature, being in creation, even if it's a manicured lawn, a natural lawn has different effects on us than AstroTurf. A natural Christmas tree has different effects on us than an artificial tree, even if they look exactly alike. Okay. That is being surrounded by abundance. It's so much harder to see the divine and the spirit when there are more layers of material things around you. Simply because there's more layers between you and the spiritual. And in the beginning, it's hard for us to see and recognize it. Now, when we think of the valiant souls, the saints who could find silence even in the midst of the noise, well, that's because their eyes have already been opened to see. It's also harder to know God when everything you see is not made by God or doesn't point to Him. This is why even the beauty in the church is so effective and helps us come to know Him. Because even if it's out of a material thing, it's material that has been designed to point towards the heavenly, to reflect and remind us of that. Okay, I want to close tonight just by going back to number 85. As one advances in following the commandments, the various attempts and attacks of the evil one have less of an effect. Okay. Something I alluded to earlier, but want to draw out explicitly, is identifying the attacks of the evil one. It comes to how to advance, how do we grow, learn. This is the spiritual warfare that Dom Lorenzo more explicitly talked about. Okay, it's not just huddling down under the St. Michael prayer, which is good at times we need to do, and fighting them off. It's recognizing. Okay, we learn to discern God's voice by also coming to know what the evil one sounds like and his presence. Because sometimes it's hard. Sometimes we're not real sure, God, is this you? Because we're still learning. So we can lean back on that. That's not you. Okay. So what's the primary way of recognizing his attempts and his attacks? We turn to St. Ignatius and his conversion that he mentions about how he noticed when he was reading the secular stories of the time, whether they would be romance or adventures, he would start feeling bad and worse. These are the things he called desolations, desolating things. Okay. Maybe it's starting to feel anxious and agitated. Okay. Maybe it's my imagination now is not going towards holy and good things, but it's going towards daydreaming, about becoming the greatest warrior that saves the damsel. I'm trying to use Ignatius's imagery, in his time. So the ideas of pride start welling up and how good I am. And versus when he read the lives of the saints, he truly felt that sense of what true heroism was. Okay. And you start feeling more confident and more loving of God, or more certitude, or having that sense of peace. So he stopped reading the other things and started reading the lives of the saints. Okay. We recognize the presence of the evil one through desolating things. Again, cause and effect the very nature. Think of God as the sun, not S-O-N-S-U-N. Okay. If you go towards the sun or face the sun, you feel warmth and you see light. Okay. And at times you may be even close enough where your front side is warm and toasty and your back side is cool and cold. And if you retreat from the sun, you're less warm. And you go far enough, you feel cool and you feel cold. Okay. The cold is the desolation. That's the sign of away from God. The warmth, the consolations are the natural effect of coming closer or being in the presence of God. And some people could notice just the slightest temperature change and variation. So this would be Scholastica, or Joan of Arc, or the saints that little, to us we wouldn't even notice it. Say 1/10 of a degree, oh, I felt that, didn't you? No. Yeah, I'm a little bit cooler, so I need to go to confession. Or, oh, I feel the warmth to do this, to be here to see God in the presence of the Eucharist, or the hungry, or the sick. And some of us, we don't notice it until it's a greater change. And maybe we slowly drift, so we can even drift further and further because we don't notice the change. And then one day we're like, wait, it's freezing here. How did this happen? How did my life end up so far away from God? Just knowing and recognizing those things. And again, you can use this. So is it a vice? Is this out of greed? Is this out of pride? Is this out of a desire to please others? Who am I trying to please? Am I trying to please God, or am I trying to please someone else? And those quieter whispers and voices. Okay, so in the beginning, we need louder things. As we advance, we become attuned to the smaller things. To know the wiles and the tools and the tactics. Any questions?
Last week we talked about before the reform is moved out. So, but we also have free will.
Mm-hmm.
So, God determines our lives, but when we do all this discernment for, are we trying to get to the point where what God has determined, what He has determined for us, our plan for us, is that what we're trying to discern?
Okay.
God has
So,
a plan for us.
right, okay, I'm repeating both so I understand, and for the recording is referencing last week talking about God saying, before you were in the womb, I knew you. Okay. But we also have free will, free choice, free option. And is discernment helping us come to actually be in God's plan more so than not? And if it's God's plan, how can we not be in it as well? There's that tension there between free will and being in God's plan. And we can kind of look at it too as two plans. Okay. That there is a plan for you individually, and there is a plan for salvation, righteousness, perfection. Okay. And we can stray from His plan for us, His desire for us, because He never desires sin. He never desires us. He wants, us to have life and have life abundantly. Okay. But He knows in that long-term vision of salvation that sometimes for us to fully give ourselves by free will to Him, that straying a little bit gets us on track down the line. And that my straying a little bit at times helps bring another one back to salvation. How many things can I share with in homilies and presentations and talks because of my screw-ups and mistakes? And deviating from what we could say is the plan, the desire by God for each of us to walk in holiness and be saints, but then actually fulfills His long fullness of plan of salvation of more souls in that. Okay. So while we have His plan includes the free will, and there are also points along that are more significant and more meaningful. And discernment, I would say, is not about discovering God's plan for me in my life. That comes from discernment. Discernment is about finding the presence of God and what is He saying in this moment, in this time. Again, we go back to identifying desolations, consolations. It's seeing the presence of God, because if I can discern and see and recognize the presence of God, then all I have to do is choose to be with Him or not. Okay. And if one can see His presence and choose Him, then one will always be where He wants, and His plan will be fulfilled. It comes out of it. But if I'm trying to say, God, what is your plan for me? 99% of my life, that will be an unanswered and unanswerable question. There may be points where he says, you need to know an answer to this for me to react, to recognize where he is. But the first question is, where are you, Lord? Where are you in this moment? Where are you nudging me in this time? It's being in union with his will, which is not his plan. And I don't mean that his will is contrary to his plan. It's a different creature. Will is very active, living, life-giving. In each moment, his will is present. A plan is a blueprint of how to fulfill that will. Does that make sense? As much, it's a hard thing. I mean, it is.
God's will, God's plan, so there is a difference.
Yeah, just those words. What is your plan for me? What is your will? Will is an ongoing, every moment, eternal desire. Okay. Plan is, what do I want you to do tomorrow? It's more of a static thing, if we think about it.
One thing that helped me, because I struggled with that, with free will and destination, which would be similar to what we're talking about. St. Thomas says that everyone's life is like a matrix, in a sense, and it's what you're saying about making the choice at every given moment. So, you may be doing this, you may, in other words, you may read in the Old Testament where God repented of something. Well, God doesn't repent of something, okay? But we made the choice. When Our Lady comes at Fatima, or some of the apparitions, she says, if you do this, then this. So it's an if-then matrix.
Mm-hmm.
And that made sense to me. In other words, the saints were just people that cooperated with the will of God at every given moment. If then.
Yeah.
If then.
If this, cooperation, cause and effect.
Cause and effect. If then. That's right.
There is no conflict between science and faith.
No.
God created science. Science is cause and effect. If you look at the development of science and where it came from, and the method was founded on if there is a cause, there is an effect. And how do we discover what causes what effect and the relationship between them? And that through that we can come to a better understanding of our world. It's not what modern science has taken it to mean. Because actually modern science does not look at cause and effect. Modern science looks at how can I prove what I want to prove. Okay. That's Tilly.
Yes. A while ago, you mentioned, I didn't quite get exactly what you said, but you said something like, evil cannot blank in the presence of blank.
Okay, evil cannot stand the presence of good.
Evil cannot stand.
Stand the presence of good or survive in the presence of good. This is why people who are long fallen away from the church or their faith can't stand to even be in a church.
I was interested in what you said about detachment, because I'm always having a problem with that indulgence requirement. You pray for the Pope's intentions, you go to confession and communion, and our freedom and attachment is there. I'm always like, how do I do that?
What does that mean?
Yeah, and because you were talking about attachment and detachment, is that the same thing that you're talking about? That I don't know if I'm doing it when I'm trying to get an indulgence? Well,
so I think it's the same and similar thing. Okay. If I put that, what I describe as what I understand as the being free from attachment to sin is that I no longer desire to sin. Okay. So if I have, it's what do I choose? So in that sense, yes, it's a connected to. Doesn't mean I no longer commit that sin or no longer sin. But if I am to choose, do I want to be free from my gluttony? Do I want to stop eating too many sweets? Would I desire to not have such cravings? Okay. If God gave me the choice today to no longer watch R-rated movies, would I come back and Martha, I wish I wanted that, but it's not fulfilling me anymore. But I want, okay. Those are things that happen. We can think about it. It's dangerous to think about it in terms of an addict because there's a question of the freedom of will and of the volition of the individual. But it would be saying, do you want to be, in a sober moment, do you want to be free from alcohol? And if you say no, you're attached to it. If you say yes, okay.
Along those lines, a priest friend of ours said that when a priest would go to St. Padre Pio for confession, and the priest might say, well, I did this, Father, but I'm not really sure. He'd say, did you want it? No. Next.
Okay. Good. Yeah. Did you want it? No. Next. Yeah. Okay. Thank you all again. We have one more week. So next week, we're going to look at specifically the obstacles to discernment. So in that sense, having painted a picture of what discernment is, how do we discern, identifying the things that, in Diadochus' terms and others, cloud and blurs one's vision from God. This gets more into identifying the wiles of the evil one, the things that block. Because a big part of discernment is recognizing our hearing, our vision is not clear. There are things that distort our image. And what are those things, and what do we do when they come up? And how do we respond and react to that? Okay. So let us go ahead and stand, and especially on this eve of the feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe, let us commend all of our prayers and concerns, and especially our desire to be in the presence of God and to see and recognize Him in the hardest of ways through the hands of the Blessed Ever Virgin Mary as we pray. Hail, Holy Queen, Mother of Mercy, our life, our sweetness, and our hope. To Thee do we cry, poor banished children of Eve. To Thee do we send up our sighs, mourning and weeping in this valley of tears. Turn then, most gracious Advocate, Thine eyes of mercy towards us, and after this our exile, show unto us the blessed fruit of Thy womb, Jesus. O clement, O loving, O sweet Virgin Mary, pray for us, O Holy Mother of God. And the Lord be with you. May Almighty God bless you, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Go in peace. Be to God.